Hi everyone! For this activity, I decided to reimagine the way I do a DBQ activity in my classroom. DBQ, or Documents-Based Question, is a curriculum I use at my school, and I use it to teach how to analyze primary and secondary sources, and also how to structure really well-written essays. Sometimes they're argumentative, sometimes expository, but at the beginning of the school year, I use the DBQ curriculum to really focus on analyzing primary and secondary sources and how they can help us interpret the past. So what I'm showing you now is a traditional DBQ packet that comes from the curriculum, and I have it scanned and I've used it digitally on Google Drive with my students. And what we do is we go through and we look at a secondary source, which is a background essay on Hammurabi's law code. There's always an essential question of was it just, or it varies on the topic. And then the students are given some instruction on how to organize their ideas, but then they get into the primary sources. And what I traditionally do at the beginning of the school year is really spend time teaching students how do you identify a primary source or a secondary source, and then how do you make meaning out of the documents presented. And then how do you take all of that new information and communicate it with your opinion. So for this activity, I decided to make it a little more 21st century by using Socrative. And Socrative is a really cool formative assessment tool that teachers can use to make quizzes, interactive games, and the space race, which is game-ish, and then an exit ticket. So I decided to make a quiz. And the first thing I absolutely loved about this is that it was really easy to put in my learning target. It's already aligned with the Common Core. It was literally 2 or 3 clicks. But if I were in a different subject, it'd be dead easy to put in a new topic. So I asked students to analyze the relationship between primary and secondary sources on the same topic. And I decided to make this quiz have a variety of formats. It's multiple choice, true or false, and short answer. So for things that are more concrete, like can you tell the difference between a primary and a secondary source, I have the information from the document provided, and then I have the options available. And what I like is that you can provide immediate feedback on the correct answer. With the short answer questions, if I scroll down, the feedback is a little more limited, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. So I provided a variety of sources for students to analyze as they go through and think about how the secondary source gives different information from the primary source. It is a little more limited because I had to put everything in manually. I'm working on putting in screenshots, but I didn't like how it looked, so I changed it up. As far as the level of engagement, traditionally when I use a DBQ activity, students they get into the groove, but they grumble a little bit. They're not necessarily really into it. So what this has, which is a cool feature, is a space race. And you can create higher levels of engagement by making it somewhat like a game. So for the space race, what you would do is you would pick your quiz. Then you would go in and you would choose teams. Now I have big classes, so I like everyone working, so I actually put in more teams so they have smaller groups. You could let the kids pick what their icon is. You can make them use their names. I could choose to shuffle the questions. For this activity where I'm really guiding students through a process, I wouldn't, but you could. And you also can choose whether or not you want to show question feedback and a final score. So what you would see, which is really cool, is the teacher sees the screen on their laptop, but students see the questions on their iPads. So it's flipped from Kahoot, where the question's projected and the options are on the iPad. So the teacher and the students could see this. I could project it, and we could have students racing through the questions and having a little bit more fun and seeing their progress. Like, ooh, we're Team Blue, here we go. What I really like is that using this formatively, I can tell where the groups are. Maybe everyone gets stuck around question 4, or maybe the indigo group really needs me to go over and help them focus, or the peach group, they need a little more of a challenge because they're already done. So this is a great way to get formative feedback, and then you can actually get a report immediately after on individual students, like say I'm tracking Johnny's progress or on the whole class, and I can download it. So, as far as if this activity still hits the same learning target, I would say it absolutely does because all of the questions are geared towards understanding what a primary and a secondary source are. And then the very last question is asking them to really analyze how those sources help us understand Hammurabi's law code. Um, I would still provide paper copies of the document just because I think people like it, but I would give it like an 8 or a 9. I think I could probably ask more specific questions and go more in depth, but I think as far as a formative classroom activity to teach students about primary and secondary sources and Hammurabi's law code, it definitely hits the mark. As far as 21st century skills, it does include critical thinking and communication with the writing piece. Um, it's not terribly creative. It's not asking students to create a new product necessarily, but they are creating writing, which is cool. If I were to change the way I give feedback, what I noticed is that the feedback that the students get on their writing is limited until somebody goes in and comments on it. So I would even the next day have class start with everyone getting an anonymous student work sample of the last question, which is, was Hammurabi's law code just? And they would go through and they would say, wow, and rate each other. Did they use evidence? Did they use primary source? Did they use a secondary source? This person's a really strong writer. They used a quote. Whoa, this person could use more evidence to back up their opinion. It's kind of scant. So I think that changing the feedback a little bit to being more student-centered and focused on the writing would be great. But overall, I think this is a really cool spin on an activity I do all of the time, and it still hits the mark.